So it's Jordan and NATO here. Another day, talking about cloud things, talking about life, talking about career roadblocks to getting jobs in cybersecurity and technology development, things like that. Because it's actually really hard to get a job in cybersecurity. And there have been a lot of complaints about that. Development, software engineering, IT. It gets really complicated trying to figure out how to get a technology based job. And
Even
so,
if you have the training.
yeah, and so to give everyone an idea of what this whole video is based on, so there was a video from the one and only Zach Hill, who runs IT Career Questions, out to help you get jobs, but bringing up some pretty good points. Let's see what Zach has to talk about today.
HR sucks. Hiring managers suck. The entire IT industry is flawed. So, whose fault is it? Really? Hey, what's going on YouTube? My name is Zach Hill. This is IT Career Questions, where we are creating IT futures. We are all becoming more and more aware of the roadblocks that are put in your way when it comes to getting in IT. Some people like to blame HR, human resources. Some people are blaming hiring managers. And some people just say that the entire industry as a whole has a problem recruiting new people. And
So, that's pretty well said. And this is something that has come up for quite some time, just in general. And even we had to deal with this sort of thing because when we were first getting Notia Point going and building new products and things like that, and coming with our platform, I had this tournament that I needed to run, and I needed help. And I was like, oh, I know. And Jordan was around. I was like, Jordan, you want to help run this tournament? And Jordan was like, yeah, that sounds good. And Jordan didn't have experience, 5 years experience in cybersecurity or 5 years experience in IT or any of these crazy things. Uh, you know, I guess for you, Jordan, when you first were working on that tournament, I guess what experience did you have at that time, for that matter?
Well, in terms of IT stuff, I mean, it was all pretty basic, and it was just stuff that I'd learned from, messing around on computers and stuff like that. I spent a lot of time in the like my previous essentially career before this was doing biology work, so a lot of water quality and water chemistry and things related to that and biology related to that. But I mean, yeah, the skills that I brought in related to IT were really just like database and data management sort of things. So,
Yeah, and even though I knew Jordan didn't have experience doing some of these things, when we were doing just general contracts and things like that, we would set up a contract for Jordan or something along those lines, and then it'd be some easy job that he's most certainly capable of doing. Maybe not easy, but something that is in his wheelhouse that he's capable of doing. Absolutely. And so, we'd go to set up these jobs, and then, it would be so complicated to even just get Jordan scheduled with some of these because they'd be like, well, but are you sure he knows how to? Well, but has he flown flying pigs before? No, like,
well, and I mean, one of the first jobs that we were really looking at was this educational based job where it was educating other people on IT stuff. And it's like I've been in, the ivory tower for almost a decade. I've spent a lot of time being taught, and I've actually taught a lot of people, and I definitely have those skills. And it was still like, oh well, but do you have, how much time do you have in Python or whatever? It's like, well, I can figure out how to teach that stuff to you. I just do you guys want somebody that knows how to teach or not? So anyway, that was frustrating. But
yeah, and it brings us to a good question because who is responsible for basically it being really ridiculous trying to figure out how to get entry level jobs. And before I get into talking about like what kinds of skills, just to get into a little more of the context of it all, if we're talking about just trying to get a job in technology or trying to get a job in IT, some of those things, we've had different students because I've worked with a lot of people, mentoring folks, working with students, helping them get jobs. Just last year alone, we've had somewhere north of 300 students, and that was just with Notia Point. And like we also had students with with our clientele and things like that. So probably somewhere north of 400, maybe 500 students that we worked with in the year 2020. And the reality of it all is that we found that it's easier for complete beginners who, if you at least have some career experience that's outside of cybersecurity, like let's say that you have some job experience. If you never had a manager before, you're like 18 or something like that, that's a whole nother story. Entry level jobs, you're like 18, never had a manager, never done anything. It's a little harder to kind of get straight into like a cybersecurity job or some of those things. But what I found is for people who have any kind of experience at all, is actually easier to help them get into senior level roles rather than entry level roles. For some reason, it's unnecessarily challenging to get people into entry level roles. And so with Jordan, we focused on skills that matter, because what are some general skills that matter no matter who you are? And I'm going to be blunt. Probably one of the most valuable skills is like being able to communicate.
Hmm.
Period.
Yeah, writing certainly is a huge skill no matter what industry you're in. You're going to need to be able to communicate what you're doing to somebody else at some point, and there's only one way to do that I'm aware of. So,
and for multiple reasons, I would bubble writing at the very top of that, definitely. Because with writing, it's like right now, I'm making like a video and stuff like that, and it's just off the cuff and stuff like that. But for this video to be organized and formatted in better ways, and having a lot more things, we have to sit down and like write out what we're doing and all this stuff. And what we do is we spend a lot of time writing, which allows us to communicate to each other and allows us to be able to basically, let's say that Jordan doesn't know how to build a supercomputer. Well, Jordan doesn't have to know how to build a supercomputer to do the work that we do, literally building supercomputers, because when I started working with Jordan, it just comes down to just spend time together and talk to each other, and then I can write down like the things that I know. I'm like, okay, well, I know this, I know that, I can write it down, and then I can turn those things into guides over time and stuff like that, and then eventually I can turn it into a video, or I can do these other things. But if I'm trying to develop software, and we're trying to figure out how to develop infrastructure to go with the software, when we brought Jordan on, I was building a software platform, and then I was talking to Jordan, and Jordan has skills of his own. So Jordan has a number of skills. Jordan is, believe it or not, being artistic is valuable, because you can come up with things that are innovative, and you can think outside of the box. So I would say maybe not artistic, perhaps maybe a better word is outside of the box thinking. And one of the nice things about that is I could go, what we do is we do like front end research, and some of the things that I claim is stuff that industry standard professionals tell me that I'm crazy, and tell me that the stuff that I'm about to make isn't possible. And I remember like it was last year, and people were like, "Oh, you can't do that," and I'd talk to the industry gurus and the industry professionals, and they all told me, or maybe not all, they were like, "Oh no, you can't do that. That's impossible. Oh no, you can't do that." And then I talked to Jordan. I'm like, "Hey Jordan, you want to make little supercomputers?" And what did you say?
sure.
Yeah. And so we made supercomputers, and it can be that simple. But I think a little bit of what that comes down to is we need to put some responsibility on those who are building the businesses and driving the businesses, because if I can't tell Jordan what I need, like Jordan can't help me. Like it doesn't matter how many years of experience Jordan has. Jordan can have 100 years of experience. He could have 20 years of experience. I don't 5 years. I don't know. But if I don't know what I want, and I go up to Jordan and be like, well, I would like this thing, and then I start explaining things that aren't possible, well, that would be a problem. Or I start explaining things and I don't really know what I'm talking about at all, and I don't really understand my vision, I don't understand my customers, I don't understand what I'm trying to accomplish at all, because business is already so complicated. well, then there's no way I would have ever been able to communicate well enough, long enough for Jordan and I to figure out how to do anything together or make anything together. And, as companies grow, when companies are small, it's a little easier for them to kind of keep everyone together and keep everyone kind of like up to date on what's going on. Everyone can have routine meetings and stuff like that. But as companies start to grow and grow and grow, people start getting too busy to train each other. They start having all these things that get in the way. And so being able to just like log the things that you do, like a lot of the things that we do is we just type things in a chat and it
Hmm.
done easy. We're just like, oh, here's how to do this one. Oh, I ran into this issue today. Oh, I ran into this bug. Here's the fix to this bug. And then Jordan might not need that random thing that I tossed into chat, and maybe it took me 15 seconds. No, that's an exaggeration. Probably took me at least like a minute or two to like sit down and type something that I was troubleshooting that I'm like, Jordan's gonna have to deal with this. If I don't want to deal with the nightmare of what he's going to have to deal with, then I need to figure
Head,
out my stuff.
head off the problems before they start.
Yeah, and it really just goes back to this, and Jordan had pre-existing skills with the sciences, so this was valuable. So he had education as well. So I don't want to undermine the value of education, but there's something very important that we need to talk about here, because in the context of education, education, I'm learning more and more, approaching education in different fields, it could probably be approached more uniquely depending on who we're talking about.
Yeah.
And Jordan, you had made a good point earlier, because in the context of you're trying to learn the stuff that you need to get into a job, you might not even know what that job needs, and schools,
Sure.
they can't necessarily keep up with what different independent companies need. So I guess, like, what are your thoughts, Jordan, when it comes to like, because you come from doing all this education and all this stuff, and you know all this stuff, and it's been incredibly valuable for what we do. Um, but for someone who's trying to decide, like, I want to go get specifically into this industry in cybersecurity, would you recommend someone go out and go to college or get certifications in this particular industry? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I I think in a lot of places in our industry, it's not going to be very valuable to get a traditional education because a lot of the companies that we're talking about, I mean, they're working on the cutting edge to the point that the things that they're working on can't universities haven't picked up on, haven't started teaching yet. So, um, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think probably for most people, I don't think that a traditional like university sort of education is necessarily the way you're going to want to approach this field. And I think that I maybe this is just getting to be too broad for this conversation, but I think in general, I think that people fall back onto education a little too often as like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just going to go to college and I'll figure it out. Which, I mean, if you look at the statistics on student debt in our country, maybe that's not the right approach. So I don't
And it's all
that's
things
not
to think about,
say
because
about that.
it's so expensive too, and it
Oh yes, yes, absolutely.
and it
Like
makes.
you're gonna get in debt,
Oh yeah.
most likely, unless somebody else is helping you finance.
Like, if you want to be a doctor, it's a little different, because you could go be a doctor and then go to any country and people have the same organs. Versus in IT or cybersecurity, you go from one company to the next company, and then the machines are all different. You've got uh, Arch 64 machines over here. You have AMD
Hmm.
machines over here. You have 32-bit machines right there. And then we're talking about like cloud and not cloud, and we're talking about cloud native apps, and then we're talking about monolithic apps, and then no one knows what that means to begin with half the time. And so we
Yeah.
just like have all these terms, all these random things, and then every single company is so unique. One of the things, because you bring up some good points, one of the things I've come to think after helping a lot of people get jobs in the cybersecurity space is, while it's not bad to start getting education in the tech sphere and things along those lines, I would almost recommend these days, like, maybe try to get, not even maybe. I've helped people, because I'm gonna say something because I know exactly how I'm gonna get those DMs, or someone's gonna be like, well, you don't know what it's like when you've never known anything before. I've had students who come from like barely knowing how to use a computer, who, moved into a senior level role working in cybersecurity. And so you can do it. You just have to kind of be aware of what you're getting yourself into. And one of the things that I recommend is, while it can be helpful to maybe start and get like some general education, or go watch some YouTube videos and learn as much as you can before trying to get into an industry. But in cybersecurity, maybe instead of spending a lot of money right away, or spending years, like 4 years right away, it can actually be beneficial to go get a job first and then work with the job and ask them what education do they want you to get. I've had a number of colleagues who I work with in my space where I've had coworkers who didn't really start their professional life until after they got their education. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That works too. I got my education before going into the job world, and what I do has nothing to do with the education that I got. Which,
Hmm.
communication and business. So now I use it for like, hey, I'm making YouTube videos, and I run business. So like, it's not that I didn't use the things that I learned in my education and my degree, but if you're trying to get into tech and you want that kind of job, even me, before I got my degree, I was like, well, I probably couldn't get a job like the ones that I have right now. So I just assumed that that's not possible for me. So I just was like, I'll go do what I can and go get some other job that I probably can get. And then lo and behold, the jobs that I was able to get are the jobs that I didn't have any of the education in. And then I got a whole lot of education along the way after the fact. And a lot of my colleagues, the same thing, where, one of them got a PhD while working in cybersecurity. One of them got a master's degree from SANS while working with their employer. And then that way the employer will help pay for things. Sometimes, not always, but oftentimes a lot of employers will pay for your education, and employers will pay for the certifications. Better yet, the employer will tell you what certification they want you to get, unless you're getting certifications for your own self-interest and your own personal curiosity, which I do that sort of thing. And I've met a lot of collegiate types who just like to learn, and sometimes learners just want to get random certifications just because that's what they want to do. So, if you just want to go get 20 certifications because that's what you want to do, that's a good thing. Just understand that that's not going to necessarily mean that that's your edge to getting a job over someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, well, because even you now, you're very senior with the things that you've been doing. But when you
Sure.
started it, it took you just straight up doing it. I guess, would you say it
Yeah,
was
of course.
uncomfortable just nose diving into trying to figure all this stuff out, or how did you feel about it from a beginner's perspective, going over the span of, like, I guess, the year or so we've been, a little over a year now that we've been doing this stuff.
Well, you gotta. I mean, what I would say is you really have to break it into little bites, and not try and take on too much at a time. Um, Work on one little thing at a time. Figure out how to install Linux, and work with Linux and command line a little bit, and have some sort of goal that you want to do with that, like setting up a Pi-hole on your network or something like that. And
Totally.
then you got to figure out how to set the Pi-hole up, and it just, if you do little projects like that, um, you'll figure it out, and you'll get the skills, and you won't get too overwhelmed. But I don't know.
Yeah, and so, who's responsible for entry level blocks? Let's see. So this brings us to the
Hmm.
big question of, like, who's responsible for the breakdown, where it's like, okay, so why is it that I've found that it's easier for students that I've had, especially ones who have experience, to just go straight to senior level jobs and not bother with lower level jobs and like more intermediate level jobs? Why is it that skipping the entry level, in my experience, has been more successful for my students? Because that shouldn't be the case in theory.
Yeah.
No one in any logical planet says, oh yeah, just start at the hard difficulty. Well, I guess if in video games you can choose what difficulty you want to start in, I guess. So maybe that's not that strange. But, it really comes down to where's my faith so far as, believing that people need to have all these years of experience to be able to perform. I have very little faith in years of experience. I have all the faith in individuals. You know,
Yeah.
I think the responsibility comes down to a company in its culture, which I think a lot of company culture is influenced by industry, I guess. So really, industry culture is a little bit of a battle. So,
Sure.
and Zach Hill talks about that. How do I put this? So like industry, oh, culture.
And it takes a long time to change something like that,
Mm-hmm. It does.
Industry culture is slow moving.
Yeah, and the challenge with industry culture is culture exists for a reason in any general society. When something, the progenitor of anything, where something begins, everything has a starting point. So if we say, if something's starting point is that it's just like chaotic, then eventually over time, like I'll just say like starting point of a new industry, it's usually just chaos. I'll just put it
Yeah.
that way. And usually, like, chaos doesn't bode well for business. And so in business, it's really important for us to, like, how do we kind of calm down chaos? Standardization. So,
Sure.
let's see.
Standardization and documentation.
That's right. Because documentation's the first step to, you don't generally even build code without documenting concepts first, or trying to figure out, like, does the concept even make sense, so that you don't just start coding something and then you just spent 2 months coding something that's not even going to work. That'll make you feel half crazy, make you pull your hair out. So in the context of calming down chaos, like, this is where people then become scared of change. Because
Sure.
change introduces chaos. And people don't generally like chaos. When things are chaotic or just all over the place, people naturally try to go back to try to standardize something. But then if there's already standardization out there, then what people will do is they'll call change wrong or incorrect, or that's not the right way to do the thing. Well, they're like, well, but that's
Sure.
different. And then people get worried because they get worried about, like, oh no, now my job's going to be more chaotic, or oh no, now the company's going to be more chaotic. And then if everything gets more chaotic, then it's going to be more stressful. We're all going to have anxiety. It's all me, and it's going to really threaten my business because and it can be really scary to think about, like, okay, so we've spent all this time, and companies also, it's a lot of work to standardize, and it's a lot of work to, like, document and be like, this is what we came up with, this is our way that we came up with this way, and this is the best way to do things. Well, when there's a new industry, and cybersecurity is a fairly new industry, the first companies who came in and started basically saying, hey, here's some standardization and here's some documentation, then generally speaking, anytime someone runs into chaos, if people don't have to come up with this standardization and this documentation themselves, then they're going to automatically adopt it as it's going to become it. The first standards that hit an industry are almost always going to be the thing that's like, this is just how we do it. It's the first way. The first
Sure.
way is the way that, like, people can't bend from it.
Yeah.
And a lot of things is, I think people also I'm guilty of this too, because, like, business owners, you want to treat it like a physical business, and then you realize that the internet's way different. Because I have a business degree, it's one of my degrees, and it's like, what I learned in business is based on business that doesn't operate on the internet, like online
Yeah.
marketing. I went to college for business administration, and I knew nothing about online marketing, trying to start a business, how to get customers online, how to do any of this stuff. I went to college for this stuff, and it didn't
Right.
even teach me how to do it. And that's because, you know, we follow the standards that exist, and people don't want to like abandon those because it's like, well,
Yeah.
but then we introduce chaos.
Well, and that's another good example of how slow the university system can be to change and adapt with, you know, methods and information changing and adapting.
That makes sense. Yeah, because it's, you know, well, education, they're heavy on documentation because you have all these books, you have all these things, and
Oh yeah. Yep.
that, you know, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because in academies you can even sit there and like look at how fast things change, because you can go back and look at the archives and things like that. And with
Yep.
the internet, things are really different. Things are really interesting. All education's changed. Even, you know, college has had to adjust, because when I was going to college, smartphones weren't a thing when I first started going to college. And I remember
Yeah.
getting a smartphone during college, and just the smartphone alone transformed the college experience. It's very different.
Mm.
You know, and so all of a sudden, when we're talking about like IT and we're talking about cybersecurity, what is IT and cybersecurity? Right now, it's basically the internet. Because if you don't have the internet and you're an IT or cybersecurity, is there such thing as a IT company that doesn't use the internet? So really, the reality is that you're moving into something that never existed before, and
Yep.
people still want to lean on standardization that works in arenas that existed that just aren't the same thing. You know, there's
Yep.
a little bit of apples and oranges going on. And, you know, then it's also like, okay, so how do we change from the industry culture? How do we like get ourselves to like pry ourselves off of like whatever these industry standards are? Honestly, one of the things I believe in is, and this is a little bias of me, but one of many things that can happen is encourage entrepreneurship.
Sure.
Because one of the things that I started running into is I would have folks having all the trouble in the world, trying to figure out like, oh, how do I get a job? How do I get a job? And they can't get a job. I'm like, oh, let's go do your own thing. Why? Because honestly, you could go get paid $15 or $16 an hour in a sock, working really terrible hours, making maybe not even getting full time. Or if you do have full time, you might have on call where, you know, it could be 3 a.m. in the morning, and if your phone rings, you got to wake up and deal with it, whether you like
Yep.
it or not. And I've had those kinds of jobs, and it's
Yep.
like underpay, like grueling work that like really sucks, in my opinion. Or you could literally just go out and just say skip it all and just start helping folks, because businesses need what they need, and generally speaking you can just go up to a business, and if you know what they need, which now that's another challenge, is figuring out what businesses need,
Sure.
but if you know what businesses need, then you can go in there and just go and do some contracts for them and stuff like that. But what does more entrepreneurship do? Entrepreneurs challenge culture. Entrepreneurs create new culture. And in a lot of ways, culture and the standardization starts with entrepreneurs. And you know, when we have people when we have Bill Gates started, you know, Microsoft. We have Steve Jobs. You know, you have these big names. We hear of Elon Musk. We hear of these people doing all these things and creating things. Who are the people who change the industry culture? The entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs change the industry culture. And are those who's at the top really? The people that people follow are at the top, you know, of that culture. And if we want to change the industry culture, then we need to have a discussion as leaders. And so I guess really, what does that mean? I guess it really means that industry culture starts with leaders. And if you're having trouble, because you know, I've had students who just couldn't get a job, went out and just started a company instead, and then that's just what they do to this day. And then oftentimes the ones who start companies, just even if they don't make the kind of money immediately that they could be making working for a company, oftentimes it's rewarding enough, because Jordan, you get this. You've been with us like during times when we were just like strapped, and times when there's been a little more money, and then like even you now, it's like okay, so it's like okay, we got to generate an income and all that stuff. Like
Sure.
it's tough. Like how do you feel about I
Oh
guess
yeah.
the entrepreneur life versus just kind of going and taking the I guess 9 to 5 option, I guess.
I mean, I think you have to be more flexible as an entrepreneur, and I don't know, be a little more open to uh, kind of the idea of times of having more and then having less, I guess.
It does ebb and flow. That's a good way to
Yeah.
put it. You remind me. I keep hearing entrepreneurs say like the whole like feast or famine thing. It really is
Hmm.
like that. You can be. I remember one time we made like $27,000 in 1 month, but then you'll go like 5 months without making money at times, or maybe like, and especially if you're trying to develop something, that's the worst.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and I feel like you need to be a certain personality type for sure. You need to be able
yeah,
to kind of roll with the punches and not like stress too much about those things, because I feel like it can, that's why a lot of people probably would prefer to just avoid the entrepreneur thing. They'd rather just go to their 9 to 5, get their paycheck, and then it's consistent, and there's a routine there that you don't necessarily get when you're an entrepreneur. So
that's true. And it really comes down strongly to the reality is that in order for leaders to have influence or an impact, leaders have to know what they want and how to communicate what they want. And I run into a
hmm.
lot of folks too, and students will be like, well, I want to be a leader, or I want to start a company, or it's like, well, what do you want? And you don't necessarily have to have all the answers, but you have to at least have like a general idea of what you want. And if you don't
Yeah,
even have that much, my recommendation is maybe it does make sense to just go do random things until you figure out what's going to help you figure that piece out. Um, but in terms of just trying to figure out like how can the industry solve the problem of all these bits, because we get the leaders together and we get the leaders talking about these things, then we can start to get into situations where the newer leaders are the ones who don't know what the industry culture is, and they're the
sure.
ones who are going to come up with things that just make sense. So it's like
Yeah,
maybe you have no idea how this industry works. New blood, there's a thing about people who've never seen something before. They're going to look at it from a different perspective and angle and scope. And if we want to change the industry culture, really it does just kind of start with, in a lot of ways, I'm going to put it on beginners too. I'm going to challenge that we do need more entrepreneurs, because we need new blood coming in here pushing the culture too. We can't
sure.
just have people coming in here and being like, I want to work in this industry and I want to get a job, and then we can't have a lack of folks being willing to like pull their sleeves up and just be like, well, there's not a company that does what I like right now or what I want to do. And I even do that sort of a thing. It's like what drove me to be like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want,
Yeah,
because then I don't have to worry about the, oh, I had to convince this person that I know what I'm doing, or I had to convince this person that I know what I'm talking about, and oh, they don't take me seriously, and oh, they, and I don't have to worry about all the same kinds of like interviews. But then of course I have other issues to worry about. But the other nice thing about, I guess, the cybersecurity industry is that there's more financial opportunity in cybersecurity than a lot of other industries and in
yeah,
IT in general. And
yep,
so, I see a lot of people going in as entrepreneurs into other spaces. So I would even say, if you are an entrepreneur, why aren't you going into some of these spaces? Because even if you don't know
sure,
what you're doing, you make more money not knowing what you're doing than like any other industry. And so,
sure.
and it'll help push the culture. And that's the best part. And if you just keep doing it, you'll be like Jordan, where you eventually end up with experience. And then you eventually have dealt with well, maybe not our customers, your customers. You'll have dealt with customers, and you'll have dealt with other business owners, and you'll dealt with situations that are really weird and tricky. And then you'll run into things like, okay, so why is it hard to hire entry level staff? Uh, and another part of it in tech too is, this is a big one, is hiring in tech is painfully expensive because even if, and this is a real one too, and we have to, and I try to be mindful of this with everyone that we work with because it's a thing and it's kind of stressful. But when you're trying to hire in tech, generally speaking, it's not like some job where you go and you pay people like, oh, here's $15 an hour minimum wage. That sounds good. Well, some places $15 is the minimum wage. Now, some places it's different, but ignore the amount and just be like low amounts of pay or whatever. Well, the problem is even if you are paying someone like a low pay rate in the tech sphere, there's the learning curve that comes with that gets costly because then there's a lot of time and time costs money. And really,
Yep.
the thing that makes the tech sphere expensive is you have to be able to essentially find ways to afford having people ramp up for months on end, and maybe no one makes any money during those time depending on what phase of the business is. So everyone has to be able to survive building phases where there might be a need for months worth of time. And the reality of that is if everyone has to have months worth of time, that's painful because you have to make sure that everyone has their bills covered, everyone's able to eat. The big one is you have to make sure everyone's able to eat. I know that sounds obvious, but when you're really running the business, believe it or not, you run into situations where it's like all of a sudden folks lose their heat, or all of a sudden folks got to eat, or and it can be really intense, especially like in the early phases when you're building, and then even as like the founders or like different people, there might be like half of the team now is like doing good financially, and then now you got to get the other half of the team there, and everyone kind of has to rally together. Everyone has to kind of agree that like, okay, everyone, we're like in this together, like here we go. And maybe a lot of that just comes down to maybe people just don't want to put the amount of time into their staff, but the other thing is maybe people don't realize just how much time is needed to ramp people up. And I think that's an expense that people don't consider because you see a lot of layoffs in the tech sphere too. And why do you see a lot of those layoffs? Because either someone was taking too long trying to ramp up. Okay, and they're like, this person's taken 2 months. We just need them to work now. It's like, well, then why did you hire a new person thinking that they would be ramped up within, unless they're like some crazy elite or something like that? And why would you think that they're going to be useful within less than 3 months? I don't care who they are. They could be a senior hire. And if you think that you're going to hire a senior person who maybe had been working at Google, working on Google servers and Google hardware and Google infrastructure, and then all of a sudden you're having them work on some completely different architecture with completely different software, suddenly it doesn't matter that they worked at Google. And you're like, hey, you've been here for 3 months and you haven't done anything. Why haven't you done anything? Because it takes time. It takes a lot of time. And on top of that, the part that's painful about that too is the salaries. When you start trying to hire senior level people, you're starting to pay like 6 figures. And so yeah, I don't know, it's complicated. But ultimately I think it really does come down to like what are you hiring to as an employer? Do you even know like what are you hiring for? I'm going to be real blunt. The only things you ever need to hire so yes, it makes sense to produce like assessments where you can just make sure that someone can at least do like grasp basic things. So yes, it might make sense to say like a minimum skill test might make sense, but if someone already has like experience, that's not even that big of a deal. Really, someone just has to like just look for evidence that they can do. You don't even need to have do an assessment, folks. You can just find out if someone builds gaming computers, yeah, questions answered. You don't have to worry if they can figure out how to use an Ethernet cord or learn how to swap drives or move data back and forth on things or open a PDF. So look for evidence of, I guess, being somewhat technical.
Sure.
They don't even need to have certifications. Jordan has college degrees, but if Jordan had no degree, I'd still be working with Jordan. You could have absolutely no degrees, Jordan, and I would work with you all the same, and I really could care less. It's like, so
Sure.
you can do the things that matter. So I'm like, oh, yeah, you can build the things that matter, and then the next thing that matters, when we're talking about, like, what do you hire? Capacity to get along with others.
Sure.
Honestly, I would go so far as to say this, and then strong writing and communication. Done.
I'd add one thing to that list, and that is a willingness to ask questions.
Oh, that's a really good one, actually. Actually, that's huge. In the sciences and in computer science and all that, being able to ask questions is key.
Yeah, you don't want an employee that's just going to try and... I mean, if something comes up where they need to ask a question, you want them to ask that question. I guess that's kind of...
That's very true. Because there's always so much to figure out. And it's like, while someone who's a little more senior might be able to just sit and look at a whole bunch of boring, dry documentation, and maybe it takes them a while. Maybe it takes longer than if someone were to come help the more senior person learn some stuff, but then they don't have to take up someone else's time. But when you're getting with beginners, and let's say that beginners aren't asking any questions, and they're sitting there trying to look through this crazy documentation, they're never going to learn anything if they can't ask questions. And there's some other challenges that come with that, because if people have too much anxiety about asking questions in this industry, it's not to say that they can't do things. It's just that this might not be the industry for them if you don't like asking questions, for better or for worse. There's so many industries out. There's millions of different types of jobs in the world, so you can get paid the same amount of money doing something completely different. So if you don't like asking questions, I'm not so sure that working in technology is for you. So that's a really good point. And so, realistically speaking, what do you need in order to know, okay, if we hire this person, are they maybe going to work out in the tech sphere? They might be entry level. Maybe they only have a high school education. They've built a computer before. They ask maybe too many questions. That's okay. And then they seem friendly. They talk to folks. They get along with people. That they're not coming in there and just setting people on fire and being like, you're insert slur, you're insert some other slur, and
Sure.
all these, or just some people are just not fun to be around in general. So as long, for the most part, for whatever reason, friendliness goes a long ways and kindness goes a long ways. So if you have those things, if someone has these things, I would go so far as to say that I would look at them for a senior level role.
And at the very least, they're probably worth training. So,
Heck yeah. And so, I would hire someone at any level who matches these things. And now, maybe they aren't really prepared for doing senior level work or something along those lines. Maybe they are, who knows. Jordan had a lot of experience doing a whole bunch of other things, so he's basically just had to pick up some of the weird subtleties of the industry, and then he's just like, okay, hold on tight, and here we go. And now you operate at the executive level now, which, but still, that's very senior. But still, the things that really come into play here is even if you're not Jordan, I'm just using him as an example. You know, we had other students, so I guess let's talk about like some of the students that we've had. Where, let's just talk about student. Let's see how much time do we have to talk. I'll talk about 2 students. We'll say student 1. And you know, I get so many questions. But anyway, so student 1. Student 1, we met them through a partner entity, and they were maybe like the least technical person I've ever trained in my life. We'll just start there. And that's not a mean thing, it's just true. They were just really not they were not technical at all, barely. And so working with them to figure out like, okay, so what are the things you just don't understand? And it just took some patience, it took some conversations, it took a little bit of after-hour stuff, but lo and behold, they were having trouble with the program that we were working through, but they made it through the program. So they made it through the program. And you know, I've taught so many people, so this has a degree of anonymity to it. So made through getting to graduation, and now they want a job. Well, they couldn't get a job. They had all the trouble getting like an entry-level job. Couldn't get entry-level work. And so I started talking to them, and you know, talking to them about their past experiences, the things that they've done before. And they had a lot of experience doing other things in other industries that was heavily transferable into the industry. So basically, bear with me here, they had these things. They didn't even have this. So they really just had super strong writing and communication skills. They had the capacity to get along with others, and they asked a ton of questions. It was like all they ever did was just ask question, to the point where it get maddening at times. But I'm okay with that, because it's, even though it might get, you know, it's like 10 o'clock at night and they're like asking you a question, you'll just be like, okay, I'll just answer that one in the morning. You know, you like come back and then now there's like a stack of questions, and you're just like, oh, you have so many questions. I'll try to answer all of them. But you know, they didn't even have any evidence of anything in their history that was technical, but they did go once upon a time to a coding thing. And so they had some self-interest in technology enough to try to go to a coding thing, right? So I'm like, well, let's see what we can do. And you know, we're talking, we're figuring out some stuff. And at this point, they'd been spending about maybe like 2 months looking for a job, and it just didn't work out. They might even spent 3 months at that point. I don't know. Let's see. Time. Yeah, either doesn't matter. 2-3 months, spending months hoping to get just an entry-level cybersecurity job. Not looking for anything fancy, not trying to do helicopter flips or anything like that. They just want an entry-level job. Well, after all is said and done, what we decided to do was we gave up on entry-level jobs together. I was like, gave up on entry level. And I was just like, you know what? This person can operate at a senior level, so I'm just going to help them understand why they can operate at a senior level, and let's just go straight to the senior level. So we just skipped to senior. And then within a month or less, this worked. Within a month or less, you know, I helped them understand what skills did they already have that existed in them, and I helped articulate the skills within them that will help them succeed in the role, like in a senior type of role. I was like, you have these skills, these skills, these skills. This would work in a senior type of role, like this, and this here, and go. And then they were like, okay, and they got the job. Now, don't get me wrong, it was really hard, and they got really anxious at times, and they're like, this job is really hard. They were sometimes worried that they might lose. So it's not to say that it was just like a walk in the park, like, yeah, I got the job, and life is easy forevermore. No, it was a trial. but they worked hard and they kept that job, and they're still doing it to this day. And I couldn't be more proud of them. And if you know who you are, I might have been so vague that you might not, but congratulations again because that's crazy. And so after that, I kind of came up with this idea of like, oh, you just skip the entry level. So if you look at a lot of my content on my YouTube channel for like past, like the later part, like especially like Q4 of 2020, I started saying, you know, oh, just skip the entry level, skip the entry level this, and skip the entry level that. Why did I start saying that? There are reasons why I started saying, oh, just skip the entry level, because it worked so much better. And this is at the time where, you know, we started moving into like, we started getting so many students like come August, and by the end of the year, like between August and December alone, I think that was like 300 of the students like right there. we had a lot of students, and you put them all together, and the ones who had the most success without fail, time and time again, are the ones who just skipped the entry level. So, and there's a problem with that because somehow our industry culture allows that to happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm sure that the people who got those more senior level skills, I don't feel bad about it. They're like, sweet, I just got a senior level job.
Yep.
You know, and so for them, it's like, this is amazing. So let's take a look at another individual. So student 2. So this was when we figured out how to have our labs. So Jordan, one of the things that you do is you build our supercomputers, these little tiny supercomputers. Do I have one sitting around? Do you have one sitting around, Jordan? You want to pull one up on the screen?
Well,
yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So we started creating our own labs for folks, and just like our own kits. And so if you want to go, and whether you want to start a business or you want to go do some of these other things, student number 2, they were. So we had a number of students who had PhDs or master's degrees. And this was one of those heavily educated ones. And we had a number of them move into like, you know, more advanced roles and things like that. But one of the ones with a master's degree, this is a person with a master's degree in cybersecurity and couldn't get a job in cybersecurity. And they're just like trying so hard to do everything they could to just get an entry-level job. And what are they getting told? The same things that people tell Jordan, the same things that people told, well, they don't tell that to Jordan now. Now, if you try to go get a job, they're like, oh, wow, you do the most amazing things. But, you know, back in the day. But, you know, they're like, oh, you know, well, you don't really have experience in the real world. So, and it's like, what are you talking about? This person's brilliant. This person can do some serious work. And so had an advanced degree in cybersecurity. Now this is where it gets crazy, right? So this is crazy. They had a degree and it was in cybersecurity, and they could not get an entry-level job no matter how hard they tried. I think for this one it took them, and this person, unlike the person here in student 1, Student 1 didn't have a degree in cybersecurity. They didn't have a master's degree in cybersecurity. Nothing like that. No, nothing like that. And they didn't have the amount of exposure and hands-on work that this other student had, right? Instead, we ran into this other scenario where they gave up for somewhat, not entirely, but they were like, you know what? I'm gonna get one of these kits and start developing stuff and maybe just start my own company. There we go. So they got a dev kit from us. And we've had multiple people start businesses with these things. because building minimum viable products is easy with what we do. But anyways, so they got a dev kit and started building a business. That's what they did. And while they were building this business, I had some conversations with them, doing some stuff, and they were just like, I'm just going to go do my own thing. And then just deciding to do that, then basically just like their job came to them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, this person's not entry level at all. And then, of course, the industry's like, yeah, but you're entry level. It's like, what? This person's entry level? What are you talking about? You people are crazy. Anyway, some crazy people. But anyways, besides the fact of crazy people, this person, they just started doing their own thing. And they were just like, whatever. They're like, I give up on this. This is ridiculous. I am not going to waste my time. I'm not going to lose my sanity. Like, the year was crazy enough. Like, is the middle of the pandemic. Like, this stuff's it's just too much. So they're just like, I'm just gonna go do my own thing. And then what happens every single time we get someone who's like, I'm just going to go against the status quo in some way? That's something that pushes the dial in the industry culture toward progress. When people challenge that status quo, and instead of just being like, I'm just going to go ahead and apply to 4,000 jobs. Hey, because you could apply to 4,000 jobs. This person, went out of their way and started doing this. But once again, what does this mean for the industry? Because this puts us right back in the same spot that we've been in this whole time. Is there's something wrong with the entry level process that we generally see across the industry as a standard. Now, the other challenges, because this is a real one. So sometimes we talk about like who's responsible, but why don't we talk about what's responsible a little bit? And then this will be like the last piece that we talk about, I guess. So what in the world is responsible for contributing to all of this? Because this is a challenging question right here. So when I think of like responsibility, part of what's going on is the cybersecurity industry, technology, the internet. We still have to remember, I'm a big fan of first principle teaching. So if you've ever heard of first principle thinking, Google first principle thinking. But let's see. So that thought was the internet is still new. There we go. That's all I want to say. So the reality is, if the internet's new, what does this mean for development? What does this mean for cybersecurity? What does this mean for all these other things? Well, this is a confusing one, because when we think of most industries have been established, which this goes all the way back to slide 1. Actually, slide 2. Yeah. So if we go back to this slide and we think about this idea that people don't like chaos, generally speaking, when we're talking about like groups of people, you might have a person who's like, yeah, chaos. But generally, groups, the vast majority will be like, I want to find a way to have as little chaos and madness as possible. So standardization. Standardization in other industries has had hundreds of years to I guess, kind of settle itself and then be modified and evolve and change. But even though the internet is increasing the rate of change across other industries, the other reality is when we're talking about industries that like computer science, where this is something where like when we start getting into the internet, modern computer science is not something that anyone could have been able to have 40 years of experience in and be like, well, I have 40 years of experience and in all my years doing this stuff, these are the things. It's like, no, there was no internet 40 years ago that we were using like we do today.
Yep.
We might have had transfer things and stuff like that, but we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have, computers that you can just talk to people anywhere globally for like reasonable affordability. And so with the internet still being new, what this guarantees is that our industry is still in a state of chaos because it's not yet fully standardized. And standardization can also be a thing that can prevent moving in a positive direction. So I guess the industry, it's still, let's see. So it's not yet fully standardized. And then the other thing is a lot of the standardization we see in the cybersecurity industry, we treat it like an established industry. Where when we see these like standards come into this industry that never existed before, we treat it like an industry that's been around for a long time, like these standards have been here.
Yeah.
Like, we literally treat new standards as if they've existed for like hundreds of years, which
It's crazy.
it is crazy. So I guess, Jordan, what are your thoughts when it comes to like the responsibility of like the internet being new and people trying to be like, well, this is the way that we've always done it? I guess what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, yes. It's not the way you've always done it because it's just not like everything's been constantly evolving. I mean, I don't know. I think employers really need to recognize that it's probably going to be on them in many cases if they want to get employees with the training that they want. They're probably going to have to provide that training. So just hire somebody that is going to be a good employee in other aspects, and you should be able to teach them what you need to teach them. So I guess that's what I've got to say about that.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, because it's just one of those things. With this being a new industry, I think it's worth considering. Instead of just following whatever you see or just hoping that you can find someone else who can tell you the answers, like if you're an entrepreneur, you're the decision maker, you're the leader, you're the one running the company. I understand that it can be really overwhelming sometimes when you're trying to build a business. And so I get it because, I build businesses and I also work with businesses. And it's confusing. But, what's worse and more confusing is not putting in your due diligence. And where does the due diligence come from? So I guess I'll just close it on like the responsibility piece. Like, what's that due diligence is really just kind of challenge yourselves. So I guess is my call to action to like employers. What can employers do? I guess contribute to a stronger culture. And I think a big thing that employers can do to contribute to a stronger online culture is on the internet, especially with people working, remote and stuff like that. Sometimes you have to put a little more time into paying attention to your people than you normally would. Because like if you're in an office, you can just be like, everyone show up to this office at this time. These are the things that you got to do. And then you can put up little surveillance cameras to make sure that things look like they're going okay. Make sure people don't seem like, and I'm not talking about like spying cameras or cameras to like scare your staff. I'm just talking about like some general things to make sure that there's like no chaos going on and no madness and that everyone's all right. But when people are working at home, they might have they might be in a meeting on mute with a screaming child, and you don't even know that they have like all this chaos going on, and then you are sitting there getting upset with them, telling your new hire, who's never worked at this company, that they got to get their stuff together and they're not learning fast enough, and they're, whatever that might be. Or like if you're scared to hire someone, ask yourself why. Now, this is going to be a tricky thing to say because sometimes when I use words like positive and negative, people get into this like positivity, negativity thing, which does not apply to what I'm about to say. So I'm going to talk more about like, so like, if you confront a problem is not a negative thing. A problem is just a problem. And how do I put this? Because usually when you say, "Oh, we have a problem," people usually, when I have a lot of conversations with folks, and I'll get like messages afterward, you're like, "Well, you shouldn't think of it as a problem. That's negative thinking." Well, it's okay. So you can think of a challenge, but let's get away from that part and just focus on acknowledge when there are setbacks. Because if you turn a blind eye to it because of the whole like, well, but that that's a negative thought, because you gotta get that out and not think of that as a negative thought or a bad thought. Or
got to be realistic with your situation.
Yeah, you have to just like sit there and like lay out all of your challenges and lay out all of your problems, like literally just lay them out. Like you can even write a list, like list out your challenges and problems. And the reality is, if you just put them in front of you, like as a business owner, you can sit there and you can figure out how to prioritize which one of these challenges are we going to take on first. Maybe you're like, okay, I want to hire a new hire. And then what if your challenge of trying to hire that new hire is, oh, but they're not going to know how to use Kubernetes with Docker on our custom platform? Then write a guide. And then make it someone's job to maintain the documentation. You can even hire someone whose job is to maintain the training aspect of it. Hire a training team. Hire copywriters. Hire video editors. Hire content creators if that's what you... Go on YouTube and look for people who can come in and solve that problem where it's okay. So maybe then the first thing to hire is, before hiring devs and before hiring entry-level people, maybe you need to hire people who can define goals. Maybe you need to hire people who can create the checklists and those things first. And maybe you can hire people who know how to do this already. If you're the employer, and maybe this is not your ball game. Maybe you're a visionary. Maybe you're good at coming up with the ideas, and maybe you're not good at coming up with the things that are kind of holding your hiring back, and things like that. So I guess in the context of listing out your challenges and your problems, list them out, because then you can start to figure out how to solve them so that you can make your business more efficient. Because otherwise, one thing that I see oftentimes too, is this goes to the death of a business, is businesses who don't sit there and start, I guess you could call this like a risk assessment. And it's interesting because risk assessments are what I used to teach people how to do throughout so much of my career, and I still teach people about risk assessment and doing risk assessments. I'm just like, get a risk assessment. It just lays out every single problem that's going on with your business, or at least as many as you can find. And then once you have them all listed out, your business can become more and more efficient because you're creating what are called measurables. And if you don't know what a measurable is, then that's part of the problem right there, is you got to figure out what a measurable is and figure out how to start having them. So, anyways, we're going to, I'm going to recommend, like, build out measurables. And measurables can only exist if you know what your challenges for your company are. If you don't know what your challenges for your company, like your hiring challenges, if you don't know what's getting in the way, like maybe the problem why you don't hire is because you don't even know what skills are needed. Great, you can hire a consultant. Great, you can look for a service that specializes in it. But once again, I think really it comes down to something that's a little more straightforward like this, for like what can employers do right now. But really, I still think it makes sense for more people starting businesses. So if you are a new site, if you're on my channel because one day you dream to be, senior doing all these things, maybe you already are, and just go start a company. Because if you start a company, you're automatically senior, and maybe it's gonna be rough. Maybe the first 3 years is really rough. Sometimes 4 years. But then if you just survive long enough to get past 4 years or so, 3 years, 2 years, at least 2 years, then the next thing you know, like, you'll be part of influencing the culture, and you'll already be the most senior because you'll be running a company. And then you can be someone who is able to help other companies who are trying to figure out, like, how do we reduce our chaos? How do we minimize our risks? How do we navigate this? How do we bring in new hires without tanking an entire company? It's possible. So, anyways, that is a lot. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So thanks for listening, and
Yep,
we'll
thank you.
have a good one.